AJ Hartley here again. I'm a professor and a novelist and a baby metal fan, and I'm here to do my third video about one of my favorite baby metal songs. I just want to say thank you to everybody who has been responding, watching, and commenting, and so on. And again, this is a completely subjective series that I'm doing. I'm just going to sort of talk you through the things that I find interesting, the way that the music speaks to me, and try to bring in whatever information seems relevant. And the baby metal fan base is obviously very knowledgeable and dedicated, so some of you are going to know more about some of this stuff than I am. Feel free to comment, correct me when I get things wrong, fix my wonky Japanese. And I notice, incidentally, that there have been people responding from Japan, which is really encouraging and helpful, and I appreciate that very much. I wish I could communicate more directly with you guys. Demo, watashi no nihongo wa warui desu ne. Zenbu o wasuremashita. Demo, ganbarimasu. じゃあ、今日の歌はメゲツネです。行こう。Okay, man, I know I wish we could play more, but there's so much to talk about already. Okay, so I mean, the look of this is unlike anything we've seen before. The setting in the shrine, and something about the way the shrine is lit. It almost looks like a doll's house, which I think is interesting of itself, and the instrumentation. We're hearing the traditional Japanese drums and instruments like the shamisen, which you can see there. So one of the reasons I love this song is that it's so emblematic of baby metal, and in some ways it is their most Japanese song, and the thing that becomes, in many ways, their signature. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it's talking about the fact that this is the most performed song of their entire canon, which is surprising given that you might expect something like Gimme Chocolate or something like that to be up there. But apparently it's Megitsune. And that seems to me really telling, because it does seem that in many ways this is their sort of coming out parade, and there's so much in this song, simple though it is in many ways, that really nails down what it is that they're about and their sort of their own mythos. And so, as well as the Japanese instrumentation, let me just rewind this a little bit. You see this image here. All right, do you see that? So as we move into the song proper, Sue starts off in the kimono, and the very first thing we see is Yui and Moa pulling the obi, the sash, which opens it up and frees her of it. Okay? And immediately we cut to the fox image, and then we cut to the dance. Now, this is really, really important, it seems to me. Look at how wide their stance is, right? I think one of the things that characterizes a lot of baby metal's choreography is this sort of very lateral, open, performative movement. You see how far apart their feet are? And something very dynamic about that. And it's something that you cannot perform in a kimono, right? So the very first thing we do is we present this sort of quasi-traditional old world Japan, and the very first thing that happens is that we see the transition out of that into this much more contemporary, much more aggressive, maybe the wrong word, but much more sort of action driven, agency driven. I know I keep using this word, but I think it's really important, and particularly because it's gendered, right? That sense of escaping the confines of something restrictive in order to be able to do what they're doing here, which I think is really exciting. So the sore sore sore, these are kakegoi, they're chants designed particularly to encourage um, labor, or when you're participating in some sort of exercise, and you're cheering people on to get them to do some work or to participate, right? So this is another element of what this song is sometimes referred to as matsuri metal, festival metal, and the chants are designed that they come out of these traditions of carrying stuff like the mikoshi, the portable shrines, where I'll put up a couple of pictures from one that I saw in Tokyo not that long ago, where people are carrying stuff. Or if you go to something like the Gion Matsuri, which is a huge festival in Kyoto every year, and they have these huge wheeled shrines that they move through the city, and people, and there's all this chanting, because the physical labor of moving them around is so intense, because they're huge, made of wood and bamboo and stuff. So and the actions as well, the sort of the scooping motion that they're making in the with the choreography is also that same sort of encouragement to participate. So again, we're sort of underscoring this very sort of traditional approach to Japan and Japanese culture. Okay, so more of the chanting. The style, it's referred to as ainote. It's not exactly backing singing from Yui and Moa. It's almost like punctuation. That's the way I think of it anyway. It's sort of commentary and little marks to sort of support the main vocal. And she's singing about, well, it's ambiguous. This is where the song immediately starts to get tricky. It could be a person who's dressed up, or it could be an actual fox. And she refers to the two tails or ponytails fluttering in the air. But of course, in traditional Japanese folklore, the fox is a magical creature that can have multiple tails. So the idea of a two-tailed, it's not just foxes, cats can do this as well. But the idea of a fox with multiple tails is not impossible. And again, the ainote, the commentary that is being supplied doesn't have a lot of content to it. It's more encouragement than it is anything else. But the last one, con 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 con, is the sound of the fox. It's the fox bark. That sort of onomatopoeic thing. So we got to talk about foxes. So part of the problem of talking about this song is that we're not just sort of deconstructing the lyrics or the video or everything, but because, as I said before, this is such an iconic song for the band, they're drawing on all this sort of deep Japanese mythology and history, much of which I'm sure you already know. So I won't labor this. So the kitsune, right, the fox, and here it's megitsune because we're using a female modifier, the met, and then the K turns into a G. The K of kitsune turns into a G because of sequential voicing, where it's actually just easier with the me and the kitsune. If you say me kitsune, it's actually a little bit harder than saying me gitsune. So the language has evolved to shift that. It's common in a lot of languages. So this is a song about a female fox, or as we would say in English, a vixen. But to get into this, we've got to talk about inari, which is a subset of Shintoism. Shintoism being the indigenous religion of Japan. That's, so far as we can tell, the oldest before the influx of Buddhism from India and China. Shintoism is, we call it a religion for want of a better term. It's hard to talk about in those terms because it doesn't clearly fit the sort of our Western assumptions about what religion is. It doesn't have a sort of larger organization to it, really. I mean, there's a sort of network of connections, but there's not like a body of authority in the same way that there is in, say, Christianity or Islam. So Shintoism doesn't have that same organizational structure or shared body of religious texts, for example, that we associate with other Western religions. There's no Bible, there's no Quran, there's no Bhagavad Gita, there's no Buddhist sutras associated with Shintoism. So it tends to be more about ritual practice than it is about a particular sort of all-inclusive belief system or code of behavior, right? Which is at least nominally attached to most other religions. And that's partly, I think, because a lot of Shintoism originates in very local conditions. It's tied to particular places, it might be tied to particular people or things. It's connected to the every. This is the problem with translation. Every word is not quite right. I was going to say that worship of, but it's not worship exactly. Respect for. The standard Japanese word is kami, which usually gets translated as God, God with a small g, because there's lots of them. But even that's not terribly accurate. Gods, spirits, presences of some sort. They might be the spirit of a particular place. It might be connected to something as a mountain or a single tree or a rock or an ancestor or something enshrined within an object. It's really hard to describe. And you pay respect of one kind or another. And in return, you get some sort of protection, you get prosperity, you get an avoidance of misfortune, and so on. And you go to a shrine. The shrines, the jinja is associated with Shinto as opposed to the temples, which is associated with Buddhism in Japan. And one of the subsets, one of the kami associated with Shintoism is the cult, religion, whatever you want to call it, of Inari, which is, again, one of the oldest, most well-known of these gods, for want of a better term. It's associated with rice and harvest and prosperity. And, for a long time, the guardian spirit or messenger of the Inari is the fox, the kitsune. So that when you go to shrines in Japan, and they are everywhere, some of them are big, spectacular things, and some of them are tiny, and some of them are, connected to people's houses and things like that, and they are all over the place. And the thing that always, there are two things that helps you recognize the shrine as opposed to, say, a Buddhist temple. And one of them is the tori, the big orange, red, vermilion gateways, the tall with the horned top, which is an archway marking a transition into a semi-supernatural or sacred space. And frequently associated with it are the guardians. And with Inari, these generally are foxes in one form or another. They're depicted in different ways. I'll put some pictures up so that you can see them. The headquarters of the Inari sect is the Fushimi Inari Taisha shrine in Kyoto, and so you'll see this long, and it's incredibly touristy because the shrines themselves are so spectacular and beautiful. We can get away from them and go up the the Tori way up the mountain and escape from a lot of the tourists, and you go through this avenue of 1,000, 10,000, I don't even know how many it is. It's a lot of these Tori, and you'll see little statues of foxes and such all the way along. So, over time, the god Inari, the kami, is not just associated with the fox, but they have kind of fused, so the fox has become the god. And like a lot of Japanese local centered folk myths, the fox is also, just as a regular animal, it's hard to explain, is associated with shape-shifting and mischief. And this is common to a lot of cultures, right? The foxes are clever predators and clever at evading hunters and protecting their own. So there's a sort of a wiliness, a slyness, right? These words are often associated with foxes in English, and there is the sort of Japanese equivalent. So what we're doing here is embracing a different version of femininity, right? Which is associated with cleverness. Shapeshifting is not reserved for foxes alone in Japanese mythology, and there are other yokai like tanuki, which is like a raccoon kind of thing, or the mujina, which is sort of a badger. And these also have some sort of shape-shifting abilities. They're usually sort of mischievous. One of the things that makes the fox different, the kitsune, is that often their power seems deeper and longer. So there'll be stories of, a man who saves a fox from a trap or something, and then meets a mysterious woman and marries her and lives with her for decades, until something happens which reveals the fact that she's actually the fox that he rescued. And frequently these foxes are fiercely maternal, and their transformation back into foxes can be terrifying. These kind of stories show up in kabuki plays and things like that, where they really sort of go for the sort of big spectacular transformation scenes, which can be really just kind of amazing to watch. And they're often about, the man has broken his word. So it's often gendered in interesting ways. Now, all of this is obviously central to the way that baby metal evolve and the sort of mythology associated with them and their investment in the fox culture. But, we have to be careful not to take it too seriously, not to assume that this is trying to make some sort of profound religious statement or something like that. I don't think it is that. And frequently the way that it is invoked is sort of deliberately as a kind of playful dodge, when they are interviewed and they come up with something they don't want to respond, what their response always is.
Only the fox god knows.
Okay, so now we're talking about the ancient maidens, and we're back in the kimono and back in this sort of very traditional kind of look. These the translation is difficult, and part of what makes it difficult also is that, like a lot of the hybridity in this, they're using very old-fashioned Japanese alongside contemporary Japanese. Inishi no otomotachi yo karisome no yume ni odoru. So these women from long ago, from ancient times, dancing in a kind of dream of transience, a temporal dream. It's difficult to pinpoint. And they live over 1,000 years, but they're still here. So I think part of what they're doing is they're establishing this sort of connection of this eternal femininity, which is expressly Japanese, connecting the past to the present, albeit in a modified present. Yeah. So and this is the kicker, right? So yes, Soyo, women are always actresses. We're not foxes. We're virginal, powerful, maiden-like, expressly female foxes. So the association that is being made is that the version of the fox that they are appropriating is expressly female rather than male. What's the difference? Well, as I said, I think that the sort of folklore around female foxes is often about a kind of depth of feeling, right? It's not just a playful, mischievous kind of shape-shifting. It often runs really deep and powerful and involves strong emotional connections and an adherence to truth. Often things go bad for the men in these stories when they lie or they break a promise or something like that. Okay, so Yamato is an old word for Japan. Nareshiku is a sort of adverbial phrase applied to a particular kind of flower, a pink, that's the name of the flower. And this is also one of these flowers that is strongly associated with women, and it's a kind of a compliment towards an ideal woman. But as the next line goes on to say, well, what is an ideal woman? An ideal Japanese woman in the traditional and the old style is demure and beautiful and, quiet, elegant, but not sort of contributing a lot, frankly. And the next line says, she's smiling on her face and crying in her heart and saying, oh yeah, everything's fine, everything's okay, that's right, while hiding her tears. So it's a fairly bleak portrayal of traditional Japanese femininity in the way that it has been idealized in the past. This is a Tori Gate, the image of the mask. Okay, so the refrain is Kitsune, Kitsune, Watashi wa Megitsune. Fox, Fox, I'm a vixen, female fox. And again, women are actresses. And the image of the mask, I think, the concealing of the emotions that you're not allowed to express, right? But what that means is we don't know what's going on inside them, which is even out of weakness, there is a potential source of strength because you learn how to conceal it. Now, of course, this little refrain is not something that has been invented for this song. Now try this. Okay, sound familiar? It's kind of fascinating, isn't it? A traditional Japanese folk song called Sakura Sakura, or Cherry Blossom, Cherry Blossom, And as people have commented on the presence of this a number of times, I haven't heard a lot of discussion as to why it's there. So I thought I'd think a little about that. This is an old song. I don't know how old it is, and I don't know if just that's because my research hasn't been able to figure it out, or because we just don't really know. I've seen documents that say that it's a Meiji restoration song, and some that say it's Edo and possibly older. So if it's Edo, it's like 17th through late 19th century to the end of the Tokugawa shogunate. And if it's Meiji or after, then it's late 19th, early 20th century. In any case, it's old. The tune is almost certainly older than the words, and the words that have been added to it later on are about the cherry blossoms. Maybe we can listen to a little of it in this version. Okay, I'm not going to play the whole thing. You can find it easily. It's a very simple song, and it's about how beautiful the cherry blossoms are, and they're all over the place, and they look sort of like mist and clouds, and we should go see them. And it's not just a traditional Japanese song. It's a sort of quintessentially Japanese song, almost a stereotypical Japanese song, and it shows up in a number of movies and of other recordings. It's like one of the go-to things when you want to get a sound of old Japan. This is the song they go to. So I think it's particularly interesting that it's incorporated into Megitsune in this way. And you notice that not just copying the melody line, they're even using sort of the phrasing, right? That we have, instead of sakura, sakura, we have kitsune, kitsune. So the repetition of a single word of 3 syllables so that it scans. And, cherry blossom is a big deal in Japan, with, the possible exception of the chrysanthemum. It's maybe the most sort of Japanese image in terms of flowers. And it's associated with festivals, a particular time of year. And it's usually, as in this picture here, I think, it's a particular cherry tree. It's a Yoshino cherry tree, which has the very, very pale, fragile kind of blossoms. And as such, it's a very feminine sort of image. Now, obviously, for baby metal, sakura is also a loaded term because they are emerging out of an idol group called Sakura Gakuin, right? The Cherry Blossom School, in which they have been basically studying how to be performers and singers and so on. But performing a very different kind of music. And, some baby metal fans are really into Sakura Gakuin. I'm not, personally. It's just not my kind of thing. So, as this is their sort of, their first single as baby metal, in which they are not a subset of Sakura Gakuin, the use of the song here, referencing the cherry blossom, seems to me sort of telling, and again is indicative of a new direction, a new movement away. That we are not going to be cherry blossoms anymore. We're going to be foxes, and that gives us a different range of Japanese cultural associations, which are mysterious and potentially dangerous, magical, powerful, mythic in an altogether different way, as opposed to the cherry blossom, which is, nice to look at. That's the favorite. That's my favorite bit. The blade coming out of the microphone as you know, because we've been talking about this version of femininity, which is all it's quite sad in some ways, even if we're moving beyond it. And then that line switches. Otome wa, right? The maidens are nametaru ikanzeyo. Don't underestimate us, or we're coming for you. You know, you will regret it. I love that. And in the live version, you know, because this gesture is quite small on stage, we get the kick instead as part of the performance, which is just great. And you can find that there's so many different live recordings. I won't insert it here because I've been talking way too long. So I'm just going to play this out. Except, of course, that I can't stop talking. So, you know, the last image is, she talks about the flower. We talked about this in regard to Headbanger, the flower which is fading and falling even as it reaches perfection. Very Shakespearean image, incidentally, straight out of Twelfth Night. Here we add the idea of fireworks, right? Because whatever the limitations, whatever, we're going to continue to blaze, to shoot up, to explode in as spectacular a fashion as possible. So we're leaving behind a lot of that sort of those more demure notions of what passes for femininity. So great. All right, I've been talking way too long. I may have to split this into sections because I can't keep my mouth shut. Sorry. You know, in many ways, as I said, this is one of those sort of quintessential iconic songs, and there's so much sort of cultural history buried into it. So I promise not to go on quite so long next time if I continue to do this. If you want me to, keep letting me know. Like, subscribe, comment, and again, thank you very much. Appreciate the interest.